Hi class, today we're going to cover classification. We're going to go through the early classification systems that led to our modern day classifications, and we're going to see how we're supposed to actually lay out species and how we're supposed to name them. Okay, first off, let's review our vocabulary. A review vocabulary is morphology. If you recall, that is the physical makeup of organisms. The new words that we're going to have today are classification, binomial nomenclature, genus, order, phylum, kingdom, taxonomy, taxon, family, class, division, and domain. So first off, what is a classification? This is where you get groups of objects or organisms and you're going to group them based upon certain characteristics. So that's easy enough. So we have so many things that are living, so many living organisms. We have to have some way of grouping them. I know you guys, we talked about primates. That was one grouping that we talked about. That falls on this classification system. Okay, so let's talk about the early ones. Aristotle came up with a system some 2,000 years ago. He was a Greek philosopher. I think we've talked about him before. He took, first off, separated into two groups. We had animals and we had plants. With the plants, he broke them up further based upon their size and their structure. So he had herbs, shrubs, and trees, and they fell into those three categories. With animals, he first broke them up with whether they have red blood or whether they don't have red blood. An example of one without red blood is a jellyfish. So if he took with the red blood, he broke it down further with where they lived. So he had the land, the water, and the air. If you take a look here, we can see how the animals, you break them up whether they're red-blooded or whether they're not. He broke the non-red-blooded ones up further in their hard or soft bodies, and then shell or no shell. With the plants, this is how he broke them up into being herbs, trees, or shrubs. So after we had Aristotle, we had Linnaeus. Linnaeus, he is going to be the father of modern classification. Modern classification system is based upon him, and he gave us some really good things from that. So he was the first to give a formal taxonomy. Okay, he looked at the morphology and he looked at the habitat. He came up with something that we still use today, the binomial nomenclature. So it's a scientific name that consists of two parts. So that's binomial, so that's two name, and then nomenclature is a naming system. You take the first part, the first word will be the genus, and the second part is the epithet, which is the species. Okay, if you look at my example that I have here, I use humans as an example, the genus being Homo, the species being sapien. So we have Homo sapien. So when we're writing out this binomial nomenclature, it's key to have the first word, the genus, the first letter of the first word is always, always, always capitalized. The second word, the species, is never capitalized. No part of it is capitalized. So the only capitalization that you're going to see in it is the first letter of the first word, which is the genus. If you're typing it, the whole thing needs to be italicized. If you're writing it, the whole thing needs to be underlined. Okay, and if you're writing up a paper and you're going to be using a genus or a species more than once, the first time you write the whole thing out, the second time you can abbreviate the genus to the first letter. Okay. All right, let's talk about modern classification. Modern classification is based upon Linnaeus' system, but it's going to pull in evolution, it's going to pull in biochemistry, and all of these other things. It's going to be made up of a hierarchy system that starts really, really broad and is very inclusive, and then it comes down really, really, really specific. So we start with a domain. There's only 3 domains. It's extremely inclusive, which means lots of things fall in it. They are not closely related at all. And then we get smaller and smaller and smaller. So we go from domain to kingdom to phylum to class to order to family to genus and then to the very specific species. Within the species, if you remember, they can mate with each other. Outside of the species, they cannot mate. All right, so like I said before, there are 3 domains: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. Bacteria contains, you guessed it, bacteria. Archaea contains the archaic bacteria. These are going to be our extremophiles. So they live in extreme environments, extremely cold, extremely hot, extremely acidic or basic. They're called extremophiles. And eukarya is going to contain the eukaryotes. So the other 2, archaea and bacteria, they're prokaryotes. The kingdoms, there's 5 kingdoms. Monera falls under the domain bacteria. And then we have protists, fungi, plant, and animal. Those are going to fall under eukarya. After kingdom, we have phylum. It's going to be less inclusive than the kingdom was. It's going to contain the related classes. The classes will contain the related orders, so we're getting smaller and smaller. The orders contain the related families. And then the families, that's the last one before we get to our genus and our species. Okay? So now they're going to have all the related genuses. Once we get to genus now, we have our shared common ancestors. So these are very closely related to each other. And we've got our first part of our name for our binomial nomenclature. The species, like I said before, these can breed with each other. Outside of the species, they can't breed with each other. And this is the most specific level of our taxonomic categories. If we take a look here, we have an example of a dog. Yes, it's adorable. That's the teddy bear dog I like. We don't have the domain listed here. So what is the domain for the dog? You guessed it, eukarya, because it is eukaryotic. The kingdom is Animalia, which is it's an animal. It's not bacteria, so it's not a protist. It's not fungi. It's an animal. It's in the phylum Chordata, class Mammalia, order Carnivore, family Canadia, genus Canis, and the species is Familiaris. So it gets the species name Canis familiaris. It's a tongue twister. All right, so we went over Aristotle and Linnaeus's methods of classification. We went over the binomial nomenclature and how to write scientific names, and we looked at the different categories of biological classification. Classification, that's a way to group organisms or objects together. Taxonomy, that's the same thing. Binomial nomenclature, that's the 2 naming system. Taxon is a group. Genus, that's going to be the very specific one. Then we go from genus to family to order to class to phylum, kingdom, and then to domain. All right, go to this site, take the quiz, take it only one time. You only need to take it one time. You can always retake it later, but not on this system, okay? All right, I'll see you guys in class. Write down your questions so you can ask me in class, and we'll get a little bit deeper into it when we get to class. All right, bye guys.